right, we have a good amount of people here, so we'll get started. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Today is the 2026 NYSCA Artist Fellowship information session for the Nonfiction Literature category. My name's Audrey Tauberger, and I'm a Senior Program Officer at NYFA, or the New York Foundation for the Arts, and I'll be leading today's presentation as well as answering some questions during the Q&A. But I'll also be supported by another NYFA staff member, and I'll pass it to them to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Kenny Shiloh Russell. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a program officer on the grants team at NYFA, and I'll just be assisting Audrey on the back end today, and I'll also be sending some links in the chat throughout the presentation.
Amazing. So before we get started, I just wanted to mention some other information sessions that we'll be holding. We have today's information session, which is for nonfiction literature. We're also offering applications in 4 other categories this year. Those are craft sculpture, digital electronic arts, poetry, and printmaking, drawing, book arts. We have information sessions for all of these categories. The sessions for craft sculpture and digital electronics already happened earlier this week, and the recordings are now posted on NYFA's webpage. We do have upcoming live information sessions for poetry and printmaking, drawing, book arts that will happen next week. If you would like to attend one of those, the RSVP links are up on NYFA's website. We'll also be recording all of these information sessions as well as today's, and those will be posted on NYFA's website afterwards, and they'll all have captioning available. I also wanted to mention that we currently have a panelist nomination form open for this year's program. Panelists are integral to the NYSCA Artist Fellowship grant-making process. Panelists can be New York State-based artists, cultural workers, educators, and community leaders who will be tasked with carefully reviewing the applications through multiple scoring rounds and ultimately culminating in a panel discussion to select the fellows and finalists. The panel nomination form is currently open, and the deadline to apply is January 6th, 2026 at 5 p.m. Eastern. Please note that it is not open to artists who are applying for this year's NYSCA Artist Fellowship. It is open if you are not applying. You can also nominate somebody else who you think might be a good fit. You can nominate them through the form, or you can send them the form itself for them to fill out. All right, an agenda for today. We'll start by going over a grant overview, and then we'll talk through applicant eligibility, the evaluation process, how to apply, application questions and tips, and then we'll end in a Q&A. If you have questions that come up during this presentation, you're welcome to ask them through the Q&A button that either should be on the top or the bottom of your Zoom screen. We just ask that you wait until I cover the section that is up on the agenda to make sure that your question isn't answered during the presentation, but feel free to use that throughout. Also, before we get started, I just wanted to mention key dates. So the applications for the 2026 NYSCA Artist Fellowship is currently open. The applications do close on Tuesday, January 27th, 2026 at 5 p.m. Eastern. 5 p.m. Eastern is a hard deadline, and that is when the Submittable platform closes. So please make sure you are submitting your application well before that time. And then all applicants will be notified of the status of their application in summer 2026. All right, so a grant overview. The NYSCA Artist Fellowship is an $8,000 unrestricted cash grant available to artists living in New York State and/or one of the tribal nations located therein. The grant is awarded in 15 different disciplines over a 3-year period, 5 categories per year, and the application is free to complete. The NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellowship is not a project grant, but is intended to fund an artist's vision or voice at all levels of their artistic development. First, before applying, it is important to determine whether you are eligible for this program. So you can apply for the NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellowship if you are 25 years or older by the application deadline date. That date, again, is Tuesday, January 27th, 2026. So if you're 25 years or older by that date, you are welcome to apply. You must be a current resident of New York State and/or one of the tribal nations located within New York State. You also must have maintained New York State residency and/or residency in one of the tribal nations for at least the last 2 consecutive years. So that would be all of 2024 and all of 2025. So for example, if you moved to New York State in the middle of 2024, you would not be eligible. You also must not be enrolled in a degree-seeking program of any kind. And then you also must be the originators of the work that you are applying with. So for example, you would be a choreographer or a playwright rather than the interpretive artists such as dancers or actors. Further applicant eligibility, you must not have received a NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellowship in any discipline in the past 5 years. If you have been awarded a fellowship outside of the past 5 years, you can apply. However, you cannot submit any work samples that were previously awarded a NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellowship. Also, while collaborating artists are eligible to apply, the total number of artists cannot exceed 3 individuals, and that includes the submitter. Each artist applying within the collaboration must meet all of the eligibility criteria, and artists applying as a collaboration cannot also apply separately as an individual in the same year. Applicants can apply in a maximum of 2 categories per year. So if there's another discipline that's offered this year that you would like to apply with, you can apply in up to 2 categories. You also cannot be a current NYFA employee or have been in the past 12 months a member of NYFA's Board of Trustees or an Artist Advisory Committee member. You also cannot be a 2026 panelist or an immediate family member of any of the above. Also, artists that have been awarded 5 NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellowships receive emeritus status and are no longer eligible for the award. Okay, to give some background on the evaluation process for this grant, applications are reviewed over the course of 3 rounds. In round 1 and 2, the panel carefully reviews and scores signed applications independently. The highest scoring applications then move forward into the next round of review. And the evaluation process culminates in an online discussion where the panel meets as a group and collectively discusses all of the applications that have made it to that point. And it ultimately concludes in selecting the fellows and finalists. Next, I wanted to go through the evaluation criteria. So all applications are reviewed based off of 3 evaluation criteria. The first one is artistic merit. A competitive application demonstrates excellence in their discipline through strong work samples that highlight the applicant's creativity, technical proficiency, and a cohesive artistic vision. The next evaluation criteria is clarity and cohesiveness. A competitive application presents clear, concise, and compelling support statements that provide valuable insights into their practice and motivations. The support statements should work together with the submitted work samples to provide a comprehensive understanding of the applicant's vision and goals. The third and last evaluation criteria is originality and innovation. A competitive application showcases innovative methods, ideas, and/or concepts that make their work stand out within the discipline. Panelists will assess the uniqueness and originality of an applicant's approach, including the quality of execution, innovation in materials or techniques, and the overall impact of your work. Applicants may also demonstrate innovation through place-based work that is informed by or responsive to a specific location, community, or environment. And again, all applications are reviewed based off of these three evaluation criteria. They're all listed on NYFA's website, so I do recommend reading them over while or before you are writing your application. We'll next talk through how you can actually apply for this grant. So we receive all of our applications through Submittable. If you don't have a Submittable account already, you can create a free one. Once you have an account, you can select the application. We have different applications for each of the 5 categories that we're offering, so make sure that you're reading the title of the application and that you're applying for the correct category. Again, if you're applying for 2 categories, you'll have to submit separate applications for each of the categories. Once you select the application, you'll be taken to an eligibility form that will have a series of questions just to make sure that you are eligible for the program. And if you answer them all correctly, then you'll gain access to the application form. You can start your application today, and you can also save your applications as drafts if you're not ready to submit. We do not allow edits to applications, so make sure that when you do submit, it is in its final form. And then once you do submit, you'll receive a confirmation email to the email from your Submittable account, and that will just confirm that we have indeed received your application. Sometimes that email goes to spam, so make sure you're checking there. But do make sure you receive that email. If you don't, something could have happened, and you can reach out to us and we can check on that for you. Again, I just want to highlight that the deadline is Tuesday, January 27th, 2026 at 5 p.m. Eastern, and it is a hard deadline. We do not allow extensions, so make sure you are submitting before that time. Okay, we'll next get into the discipline-specific information. So for nonfiction literature, our working definition is this category accepts work in all varieties and genres of nonfiction literary prose, including essays, criticism, journalism, autobiography, monographs, memoir, creative nonfiction, and experimental forms. We actually just updated our discipline definitions to hopefully be more inclusive and responsive to the field at this time. You can read through all of the definitions on our website. We just linked it in the chat. And if you have any questions on whether your work fits in this discipline, you can also email us just to check. Okay, so the application form, you'll again first be taken to an eligibility form to make sure you're eligible. Then you'll be taken to the lead applicant information and/or the collaboration information if you're applying as a collaboration. This will just ask for your name, contact information, and some general questions relevant to this category. You'll then be taken to the work sample portion of the application, then support statements, and then it will end in demographic information. The demographic information will not be shared with the panel. It will only be used internally for reporting purposes, but will not affect the review of your application. Okay, work samples. Work samples are the most important part of your application since it will be the primary point of review. Again, the NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellowship is not a project grant, and so therefore you should be submitting work that is completed or is a completed piece within an ongoing, continuing body of work. For the nonfiction literature category, applicants must submit one manuscript, which can be up to 20 pages in maximum length. It can be less than that, but it can be up to 20 pages, plus an additional title page. So altogether, that would be 21 total pages. For this category, we only accept PDFs, and your work sample must be in English, must be 12-point font, double-spaced, and the title page should include the title of the piece and the date of completion. Your manuscript can consist of a singular body of work or multiple bodies of work. If your work sample includes a combination of excerpts from larger works, we do strongly recommend that you include substantial portions from each larger work rather than small fragments. Also, work samples created in the past 5 years are highly recommended. If you do submit older work samples, we recommend adding some context or an explanation to why you chose the older work samples in either your artist statement or the synopsis section. Also wanted to mention that there is no restriction on published or unpublished work. Panelists are asked to review work samples independent of the artist's career point. Therefore, the status of your work's publication has no bearing on whether you receive a fellowship or how it will be reviewed by the panel. Also, there's no requirement for how you format your title page, but if you are submitting multiple works, we recommend using the title page as a table of contents and listing the title of your work with the corresponding page numbers. Some further information on work samples, please do not include the publication and or production information anywhere on your manuscript. Again, materials can be previously published or not, but if they are published, scanned excerpts from books or periodicals in published form will be ineligible. Also, please do not include your artistic resume in your PDF, and manuscripts must be in English or can be translated into English by someone other than the artist. Also, again, the 21 pages is the maximum, 20 for your manuscript and 1 for the title page, and panelists will be instructed not to review any materials beyond that, so please just make sure you're keeping to that page limit. And then outside of your manuscript, you'll be asked to submit a synopsis. This is 150 words maximum. And for your synopsis, it should offer a clear and concise summary of your manuscript. And if your manuscript includes multiple works, you can itemize each one and talk about them individually. For the synopsis section, as well as the support statements that we'll talk about in a second, they are in text box form. So we recommend that you answer these questions first in a Google Doc or Word document and then transfer them over to your submittable application. Okay, after the work samples, you'll be taken to the artist statement. The artist statement, you have 250 words maximum, and this is a concise statement giving an overview of your artistic practice. This statement should give a brief introduction to ideas, themes, and methods in your practice. It should answer the questions how you make what you make and/or why you make what you make. This statement should also specifically reflect the ideas and inspiration relevant to your submitted work samples. So it should be connected to your work samples. Again, clarity and cohesiveness is one of the evaluation criteria. So it's important that they are relevant to the work samples that you're submitting. Also, you can use this statement to highlight your role in creating and executing the work, as well as describing the key technical aspects of the work. And it's important to note that this is not an artist bio, it's an artist statement. We at NYFA created a artist statement 5 do's and don'ts that might help you when writing your artist statement. We just put it in the chat, but it has some helpful tips for what to include and what we would avoid including. And then the last written part of the application is the cultural statement. This is optional. You can include this if it feels relevant to you, your practice, and your work. But a cultural statement is 250 words maximum. And this is a supplemental statement that describes how your work is related to and/or rooted in a specific cultural practice, tradition, or community. The statement can also offer an opportunity to describe how your artistic work relates to or stems from your culturally specific lived experiences. And that is all of the contents of the application. After that comes the demographic information, which again will not be part of the review process. And before we get to the Q&A, here are just some helpful application tips. We recommend reviewing the application guidelines closely. I talked over most of them today during the presentation, but everything is up on NYFA's website. You can always refer back to them there. Also, make sure you carefully review and answer the eligibility questions on your application. Again, if you are not eligible, you will not be able to access the application, so it's important you answer those carefully. Also, ensure that the contact information on your application is correct. The email that you provide is how we will get in contact with you, so make sure you're using an email that you use and check regularly. Also, allow enough time to upload your work samples, and do not wait for the final hours ahead of the deadline to complete or submit your application. Technical errors always happen, and we want to make sure that you can apply if you would like to. So we recommend giving yourself at least 24 hours before the deadline to apply. And again, you can start your application today. Applications are currently open, and you can always start a draft and come back to it over time as you're working on it. And then again, make sure to click submit before Tuesday, January 27th at 5 p.m. Eastern. And that was the presentation portion of today's information session. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll start to transition into the Q&A. So if you have any lingering questions, again, you can use the Q&A box on the Zoom screen to ask any of your questions. You can also contact us at fellowships@nyfa.org if you have a more specific question you would like to ask. And then we do have a pretty comprehensive FAQ on our website. We'll put the link to in the chat. We also recommend you reading over that. Again, thank you so much, and I'll give it a second before we start answering some questions. Okay, I have a first question. If the manuscript is in English but has a few words in a different language, for example, in dialogue, should those words be translated within the manuscript? If it's only a couple of words, for example, in dialogue or just a couple of words, as a part of your work, that's okay. You can keep it in whatever language it is originally in, as long as the majority of your work sample is in English, since that is what the panel will be reviewing it in. The next question, do I need to include footnotes in my submission? No, you do not need to include footnotes in your manuscript. We have a question about format of sample. The guidelines say 12-point font, double spaced, but experimental forms is listed as one of the disciplines. What if the visual format is part of the writing and doesn't always conform to 12-point or double spaced? So if the visual format is part of your work, you can include how it originally is supposed to be formatted. That is just our guidelines, generally to be 12-point or double spaced. But again, if that is part of the visual language of your work, you can keep it in its original form. Can you share about what the support statements entails? So the support statement part of your application is the artist statement. This is a required part of the application. And then you also have the cultural statement. This is optional, but if you feel like it's relevant to you and your work, we encourage you to include a cultural statement as well. We have a question regarding the overall category nonfiction literature. Do you think writing about the practice and history of art and design would fall within this category? Yes, writing about the history of art and design would fall within nonfiction literature. We have a question, since this is not a project-specific grant, how do we craft our artist statement and select work samples? So for work sample selection, that's up to the artist. We recommend choosing work samples created within the past 5 years. So the most recent work samples and work samples that you feel most strongly in and reflect where you're at as an artist right now. And then also making sure that your artist statement connects back to your work samples and that there is a cohesiveness within your full application. And we have a question, can the applicant name appear anywhere in the manuscript or artist statement or cultural statement? Is this being judged anonymously? So you can include your name in your materials. This is something we're changing this year for the fellowship program where it will not be reviewed anonymously. So you can include your name in your manuscript. The next question, can I use ellipses to break up long passages? Yes, you can. The next question, I would like to include images in my PDF. However, I'm concerned that doing so will take away from the page limit. Do you have any advice on this? So you can include images in your manuscript if they're relevant to your work. Again, you do need to stay within the 20 pages, so that is up to you on whether you would like to include images since it will be part of the page limit. The next question, I'm wondering how broadly the cultural statement can be interpreted. Can artists speak to cultural grounding in communities like the LGBTQ plus community, or is the intention more focused on heritage-based cultural practices or traditions? So you can definitely talk about any community that you are part of, either you as an artist or that your work relates to, or both. So that can definitely include the LGBTQ plus community. And it can also talk in any way about your culturally lived experience um, in any of the communities that you're a part of. Another question, if we submit published work, is the expectation that we redact the name of the newspaper or magazine? Yes, if you are submitting published work, we ask that you redact any of the publication information on your work sample. I have a question about work samples. If we are submitting more than one piece, would you recommend showing breadth of what we were working on in the genre or focus on excerpts from one project for the sake of clarity and coherence? I think that is up to you. However, we do recommend including excerpts from larger works rather than small portions, more small excerpts of your work, just so that the reviewers can get a sense of what you're working on in more depth. So that would be my recommendation, but that is up to you. We have a question. If your work involves both your own original nonfiction writing and the translation of nonfiction literature by an author long dead, which you will translate yourself. Is that eligible for submission? So you must be the originators of the work that you're applying with. So you can apply with your own original nonfiction writing, but you are not able to apply with translations. When will the recording of this video appear on NYFA's website? It will appear within the next week. It will likely be uploaded early next week, so you can keep an eye out for that. It will be under the information session tab on the fellowships page. We have a question: how many fellows and finalists will be selected for this year's program? That number fluctuates and depends on the year. Finalists are always 3 per category, and starting in 2024, finalists are also awarded a $1,000 award, but the number of fellows does fluctuate per year. I have another question. My total book is 250 pages. I was thinking of submitting the first 20 pages, but breaking it up might showcase more descriptive writing. Can I break up the sample? Yes, you can break up your sample, even if it's within the same book. Just make sure that your title page details that. Another question: are the same panelists reviewing all the literature categories? So if I apply to both poetry and nonfiction, will the same panelists view my application for both categories? No, there will be a different panel for both nonfiction and poetry. So if you are deciding to apply for both literature or literary categories this year, they will be reviewed by different panelists. If the published work is a book, can we keep the title of the book on the sample title page and explain that the excerpts come from a single book, but simply avoid including whether it is published or what press published it? Yes, exactly. You can include the title of the book and describe what excerpts you're including while avoiding including whether it's published and what press published it. Can you apply to be a NYFA panelist in other categories, all other than nonfiction, if you're applying for the nonfiction fellowship category only? Or can you not be a panelist in any category if you're applying to a fellowship? Unfortunately, if you are applying for any of the categories in the 2026 NYSCA Artist Fellowship, you cannot apply to be a panelist. Again, we recommend if you are applying that you send it to anybody who you think might be a good fit. The next question: is it a problem to submit less than 20 pages? No, that is just the maximum requirement. You don't need to submit up to 20 pages, and it will be reviewed just the same if you decide to submit less than that. The next question: can we submit twice with 2 different work samples to the same category? No, you can only apply for each category once. Are panelists compensated for their work as judges? Yes, panelists do have a monetary stipend if they participate as a panelist for the program. Can your nonfiction subject be about an arts and education program? Yes, there is no limitation to what the subject can be for your work. We have another question. Is it possible to apply as an editor of a publication? So for this grant program, you must be the originator of the work that you're applying with. So if you are an editor, you wouldn't be able to apply with that as your work sample. Okay, we are starting to slow down on questions. I'll give it just a moment, but if I didn't get to your question, again, you can email us at fellowships@nyfa.org. You can also, again, check out our website. We have lots of answers to frequently asked questions on there, but I'll give it just a second to see if anything else comes through. I'm seeing a question, do we need letters of recommendation? If so, how many? There are no letters of recommendation for this application. Again, it's just your work sample, a synopsis, and then the artist statement and an optional cultural statement. All right, and we will finish our information session there. Again, you have our email up on the screen, but I just want to thank you all so much for taking time out of your day for today's information session, and we wish you the best in applying. Thank you all so much.